I always say that the best thing about consulting are the people that you work with. You're always working with the best, pushing each other to learn more, do more, be more, and go even further. Which is why I'm very excited to be able to go through these conversations with some of our alumni who've gone on to even greater success beyond their consulting career, and learn from them about the high points, the low points, the achievements, the wins, and the lessons that we can all take and apply in our future journeys. Godfrey Sullivan, I normally start by saying everyone's title, but yours is going to give me a challenge. So I'm going to do this very slowly. SVP, Strategy, Products, Solutions, Digital Partnerships.
Digital Partnerships, exactly.
At Simea, at Visa.
Indeed. Well done.
All right. I think you definitely won an award for the longest title of any guest of this podcast, but it's great to have you with us.
Fantastic to be here, Karim. Look forward to the discussion.
Indeed. So this discussion, as you know, is about the journeys that our alumni have taken and the lessons learned from looking back at them and trying to sort of get some nuggets of wisdom maybe, and maybe some perspective. And the most interesting, when we had a little chat before, the most interesting thing about you is somebody who's had a career in consulting and financial services. You actually started with a philosophy degree. So I'm very curious to know, how did we go from philosophy degree to a career in consulting and financial services?
Yeah, there's not many of us around, I can tell you, Karim. If you look across the strategy and PwC landscape, I don't think there's too many philosophy degrees. But it goes back. I think it goes back to the very beginning and to some of the influences of my parents. They have a beautiful story, which in many ways shaped some of the steps in my career. Sullivan is a kind of Irish Catholic name. William Jeremiah Sullivan moved across from County Cork to Yorkshire about 150 years ago. And my father grew up in Yorkshire in the north of England, in a very Catholic family, to the degree that his elder brother was a Catholic priest. His oldest brother died in the war. And he decided when he was a young boy to go into the priesthood. And as I thought about life, I thought, it's a big decision to make for anyone. He became a priest and he joined something called Mill Hill Missionaries, which was a group which traveled around the world. So in 1952, he got on a banana boat at Liverpool Dock that just arrived there, and went back in the boat, and he went to Cameroon in West Africa. And he lived there for the next 18 years of his life. He was a parish priest. He had a beautiful parish by the beach. He set up the Catholic education system in British Cameroon. And then one day he was in the bishop's house beneath Mount Cameroon, this huge mountain that overlooks the country. He was having a cup of tea. And then this group of American nuns came into the bishop's house. And one of them was my mother. They, began to kind of meet up in Cameroon, and eventually fell in love. She was there from Philadelphia. She herself was training to be a nun, and they got along really well, and eventually decided that they were going to get married. So it's a wonderful story, but it gets a little bit better, because then their parents were kind of like, you've devoted your life to this cause, and now you're going off and you're leaving the church. So they said, look, before we get married, let's think about it for a while. So they decided they were in London at the time, and they decided, look, let's go to the birthplace of Christianity. Let's go to Jerusalem and think about it for a while. So they got on a plane. They had hardly a penny between them, and they flew across and rented a place just outside of Jerusalem. And because they didn't have any money, because if you're a priest, you don't get paid anything, there's no pension. So they could only rent in no man's land outside the city. And after a while, some of their friends said, look, you can't live here. So they moved into the Armenian quarter of the old city. I was born there. My brother was born there. I was born on the Mount of Olives. And he became a journalist. And we moved back when I was about 2 years old. He was writing about what was going on at the time, similar stuff to what we see today, and not always looked upon favorably by the authorities. So we left when I was about 2 years old and moved to Oxford, and I grew up in Oxford. And so growing up in Oxford, my career choices were shaped partly by this kind of fairly extraordinary story of my parents, and this thing in the back of my mind to say, a young man growing up, why does he give himself to the church and make a kind of life choice like that? And then the other factor was growing up, we didn't really have much money, and it was a kind of very humble upbringing, and so as I went through and thought about university, my father would always say, do what you enjoy. So I thought, you can do different degrees, you can do engineering, do business, but I was really interested in this question of, why are we here, and some of these bigger questions. So I thought, let me just study philosophy. We'll see how it goes. And then as I went through and I talked to everyone else who had graduated after studying philosophy, and I saw the careers that they had, I thought, this is not going to get me out of my poor standard of living. So I need to do something. And if I'm going to work, then I might as well go for a well-paying job. So I did a master's in business, and then I went to the Oxford. We grew up in Oxford. I went to the Oxford University Career Centre, and I sneaked in. I didn't go to Oxford University, and I sneaked in, and they had a book about careers, and I opened the book, and I remember seeing there was the top 100 companies. I thought, this is the way to make money. Apply to these companies. And I applied to all of them, 100 letters, and I got 98 rejection letters. And there was 2 responses, one investment bank and one in consulting. And of the 2, the investment banking discussion, I was like, I don't want to work in this place. Then the consulting discussion, it was okay. It was, this is a way to earn some good living and learn about the world, and so that's what brought me into the consulting path.
Well, it's a good ad for consulting then, if you chose it based on it being a lucrative career.
Indeed, it's turned out quite well.
All right, so then you go into consulting, and you spend almost 2 decades in consulting, and then we go to financial services. Was that also something that you thought about, and now you're looking something up on your mobile phone by this stage, not books in Oxford career centers, or what triggered that move?
So all through my consulting career, it was all in financial services.
Okay.
So going to Visa was something of a continuation of that. But it was, consulting. It's a challenging career. It's incredibly rewarding, but there are times of that are challenging. And I remember as I kind of went through my career. At each point where things were getting tough, there would be these most amazing projects that would come along that I would fall in love with. So I remember it was back in 2008, 2009, just after the global financial crisis. Markets were tough. And then we got a letter from one of the sovereign wealth funds saying, we want to establish a new bank in Libya. And I was put on the project, and we had $500 million of capital, and we asked them, what type of bank would you like? You can tell us what type of bank we want. And so it was, we went over to Libya with the team, and we assembled a board of directors and built a bank from scratch, end to end, which was, kept me, really engaged, and, I was living and dreaming it. It was kind of like my bank. And then subsequently worked on a variety of projects, whether it's some of the vision work in Saudi, setting up a bank recently in Abu Dhabi together with a team over there. So there were all these kind of stages which kept me like super engaged in consulting. And then it was quite by chance. I was quite happy. And then in 2020, in the midst of COVID, one of the partners at BCG in London sent me an email saying, "Look, my client in London is hiring for a role in Dubai in Visa." And I remember I I pressed forward and I was typing in the names of some of the people that I thought would be interested in this, because I thought, I'm like so happy here. The compensation is going to be a challenge. This is something that maybe someone else is interested in. And I remember, and then I just deleted that and I said, no, let me reply. Let me just ask her, a little bit about the role. And then I remember a couple of interviews in. It was a long interview process. A couple of interviews in, I thought, this is the place I want to work, and that's what kind of drove the shift. I think part of it was also the fact that with Visa now it's much broader geography. So there's, my current remit, I've got 86 countries. Going really, really deep into payments. So a couple of things which really enticed me.
All right, so the first move was basically understanding the economic reality of the degree that you had chosen.
Exactly.
And not wanting to be stuck with that. Very, very wise move. And the second one was basically, I fall in love with the kind of projects in this industry, and now here's an important player in this industry, and this opportunity presented itself.
Indeed.
Okay. That actually gives me a lot of hope, because many of the others that people I've spoken to, a lot of the time they were very deliberate. And I'm like you, I react to things. I reacted to things in my career rather than every single time was very deliberate about it. But you're a great example of here's another path that you could follow where.
Yeah, I think
as long as you head off in the right direction, which you did by saying, I'm not going to follow the philosophy track if my interest is a sustainable career or a good income, but then basically followed what you like doing.
Exactly. And I think exploring the world is like a big theme of this. I think whether it's in consulting or whether it's in my role now in Visa, the opportunity to explore the world and like dive down into problems either for kind of businesses or for banks or for card holders or merchants trying to accept payments, all this stuff. You learn so much about the world. It's just interesting.
You mentioned the 86 countries. Is that something that makes it more interesting for you? The fact that you see how different parts of the world are evolving in terms of how they interact with payments or how their societies interact with money and how their businesses do? Is that something that drives this?
100%. It is absolutely fascinating. The things you learn about the stablecoin industry in Nigeria and the linkages that has to mobile money in East Africa, how this links to players in Kazakhstan and problems that you might solve in Central Asian countries, the role of government driving innovation here, joining the dots is so interesting. I feel like so lucky to be in this kind of current role with that kind of diversity and of different things to be thinking about.
I like how you frame that, because I think sometimes people look at sort of senior people like you and they think, that's it, you've sort of gotten to, you're a senior person, you know everything there is to know, and everything just comes natural to. And actually, no, we're always constantly in a learning mode, especially in an industry like financial services that's changing so rapidly as well.
Yeah. And you have all these new companies coming up and kids with like super creative ideas, new technologies coming onto the scene. Yeah, it keeps you on your toes. It's good.
And going back a little bit to the story with your parents. So clearly, I think your father he also became a journalist afterwards?
Yeah, so when he left the priesthood, he became a journalist for a while.
So clearly, and I know you're somebody who's quite sort of has a lot of convictions and is very vocal about a sense of justice in the world, is very vocal about giving back. You're in all sorts of programs, Endeavor, you've been a tutor, you're a mentor, you've set up an endowment in the memory of your father to help people get an education. So presumably that comes from them, or that and the way you were brought up. But then at the same time, you work in this industry that's basically couldn't be more capitalist. Right? Couldn't be more capitalist. You're basically working in an industry that wants to make it easy for people to spend money on material goods. How do you reconcile these two?
Yeah, indeed. It's an interesting conundrum, right? I kind of reflect on how fortunate, just the luck of being born to an English father, American mother, and just a passport that puts you in a country where you can go and have free education and university and all of these things, and the opportunities that opens up versus many other people around the world. You just don't even have a shot at any of that. And I'm very kind of conscious of that. And also, like, partly coming from a humble background, and as I see, challenges around the world, I think that there's people who are fortunate enough to be given these opportunities and to succeed in them. If we don't give back somehow, that's, it's pretty selfish. And the things you give back, there's not a huge amount, but it is something. And for some people, it can be, really important and significant. And so that's something that I've tried to do. In the grand scheme of things, it's not very much, but it's important to me. It's important to me to kind of model that for my kids and the people around me, so that in the future, they'll maybe do more than myself. Being born in Jerusalem is a big deal. I'm not kind of ethnically or religiously attached to that part of the world, but I was born there and I'm connected there, and it's got it on my passport, born in Jerusalem. And so when I see the kind of horrors that we see on a daily basis at the moment, that's an issue. And I try and do as much as we can, whether it's in the context of the corporate relationships or whether it's the context of setting up the scholarship in memory of my father, who was a journalist over there. And it's a tough time for journalists over there. And so creating the next generation and showing that people outside listen and watch and care and feel the sense of injustice, and doing something concrete about that is really important, I think.
You've talked about the influence of your parents and in particular your father in terms of how you see the world and so on, but I think your father only passed away recently, correct?
Yeah, earlier this summer.
Okay, so he's also seen, he was around to see you rise and to see your career develop and so on. Did that relationship continue in terms of him being a source of advice for you in terms of how you're going about your work or your managing your life, or did it reverse? Were you now the one that's sort of feeding back? How did it change between you being young Godfrey, who's sort of influenced by because we all have the father figure that's super impressive when we're young, and then as we grow older, we realize, not everything they did was perfect.
Yeah.
And then we start having a personality. How did that dynamic change? I'm very curious.
So it was very interesting going back. My father died earlier this summer, but my mother has also had a huge influence on my life. And going back to their house, they live in a small, semi-detached 2-bedroom in Oxford. It was going back on a spiritual retreat. They were just so happy in each other's company. My mother loves the garden. She knew all the plants. She created this wonderful garden, and it was really like a kind of a very calming environment. So you come back and you have these client calls, or you have projects in Visa, and then you go back and it's kind of like almost like a Zen, peaceful experience. So it was less in the kind of mentoring from my parents during my life, but just providing that kind of warm, grounding sense of home and sense of roots, which has been, again, very important in how I think about raising my 2 boys. I've got 2 boys, 10 and 12 years old. They're, learning what it's like to go into this world. And I think about replicating that loving environment for them is like super, super important.
Sometimes we carry things from our parents without realizing that that they had such an influence, and we're trying to recreate it. You mentioned that with your kids, you try to do things like create memorable moments, as we were discussing before.
Yeah, indeed. So each year we go on a kind of lads' holiday. I try and make them as kind of colourful as possible. We took them to the Russia World Cup.
You going to the Russia World Cup with the excuse of the kids, or the kids wanting to go to the Russia World Cup?
Well, they were like 6 and 4 years old at the time, so they didn't really have a chance. I'm like, you guys, there's a World Cup, it's a big deal, and we're going to go over and watch it. And then France got to the semi-final. Their mother is French, Lebanese. And we had tickets to the semi-final, but then England got to the other semi-final. So I had to rummage around Moscow to find tickets. I said, my kids cannot miss watching England. Of course, England lost that semi-final. France won and went on to win the tournament. So now my kids are, Mbappe fans, allez les bleus. which is going to take years of re-education. But so yeah, those memories. I'm in a busy corporate life, but the time you do spend with those close to you, it needs to be super memorable. So each year, whether it's World Cup or horse riding in Kyrgyzstan, this summer we climbed Ben Nevis in the pouring rain in Scotland. These things, hopefully they'll take them with them as they go through kind of adult life and all the trials and tribulations of that.
I want to go back a little bit because we've on this podcast we've had people who've come through consulting for 3 or 4 years. I think, but in your case, it was actually quite a long time. Do you look back, when you look back, clearly it was a big part of your life, but now you're at Visa, you're going to go on to other places later. What sort of...
I don't know, I might stay at Visa for a long time.
Message given is, bosses at Visa, please take note. What skill sets do you find yourself using while you're at Visa that you actually developed in consulting?
I was thinking about this before we spoke, Karim, and it has been such a good education. This deconstructing of a problem is just so applicable in all aspects of business life. The Barbara Minto's pyramid principle. As soon as there's someone hired into my team, I say, you need to understand how to communicate. There's a lady in the 1970s, she wrote this book, you need to read this. And that way of solving the most complex, amorphous problems into a simple question, let's agree on what we're answering, and then how do we break that down, and then come to a conclusion, is the kind of like mainstay of, creating value and solving many of the consumer problems, business problems that we face. So I think that training has been fantastic, and I remember with fondness my time in kind of strategy and going back into the history of how the industry has evolved. I think it's that combined with reinforcing this curiosity about the world. I find the people who have been most successful, either in consulting or in business, are the ones who are always learning and exploring, and actually love that experience of learning and exploring from others.
And I also noticed that you come a lot to our alumni events, where invariably you're meeting other alumni and you're having a chat. Do you find common themes in terms of people who've been through consulting and then have gone on to other industries, in terms of the linkage between consulting and their careers, or in terms of how they are as people? And are there common threads, or is it still a very different journey for each person?
I think it's. I think the things which brings us together, and you were part of that group who kind of grew up in the early days of Booz and then Strategy and. That was a real bonding experience. I'm not sure if it was the period in our lives, or the nature of the kind of like trailblazing work across the GCC, but that's a pretty tight-knit group. And the alumni events are fantastic. There's that real sense of warmth, and people have risen to incredibly influential positions across the region and beyond. So paths have been different, but I think that there's a great warmth that it's really hard for other companies to replicate. But the Booz Strategy and team of those days certainly has managed it. And this is a nice podcast, Karim, reinforcing that, bringing back some of the old faces, connecting people.
Yeah, the reaction to it has been more engaged than we could have hoped for. So yes, there is clearly something there, as you say. So part of your remit is innovation. Part of your remit is looking at sort of new things coming up in financial services. But that isn't something that started with your role at Visa. That was something that was inherent, and also the kinds of work and as you say, your curiosity. You told me a story about Bitcoin at $100. Why aren't we having this interview on your mega yacht right now?
Yeah, there's a long story. I remember it was probably back in 2013. I was in Kuwait with there was Nick Houry, who's now at Visa, and Mazen, who's in one of the consulting companies. And we were talking about this thing, Bitcoin. And I was telling Nick, this is like a really important innovation in financial services. we should think about it. What's the structure of value transfer moving forward? And some of the guys are saying, Godfrey, what the hell are you talking about? There's a bank over here. We've got some problems here and now that need to be solved. And so I went off and I, found, because, if you're advising big financial institutions or thinking about innovation, the best way to do it is learn it, try it yourself. So I went out and I bought a bunch of Bitcoins on one of the exchanges at the time, which was Mt. Gox, an exchange in Japan. And so I had hundreds of these. They weren't worth very much at the time, but I thought, let's put some money in. And then, of course, Mt. Gox collapsed in 2014. And I remember I was thinking, and you could tell the few days leading up to this thing is going to collapse. And so I was trying to get my Bitcoins out. Couldn't get them out because you needed to then have another account. We had to set up a whole KYC thing, and there weren't many accounts at that time. And so I thought, all right, if I can't get the Bitcoin out, then maybe I can get the cash out. So of the hundreds of Bitcoin, I sold them all on the exchange in return for cash, and then tried to wire the cash out. And I couldn't get the cash out either. So the whole lot stuck there for the last 12 years or so. There's been this court case going on, which finally settled. And so I got some back, but a tiny proportion of what I had, which is the reason why we're not on the yacht.
Is there this quiet moment on a Saturday afternoon when Godfrey's sitting thinking, if I only still had those Bitcoins, I would be worth X this night? Well, yeah. Do you look back?
Yeah, not so much. I bought a fair few in between, so I've still got a fair portfolio.
So regret is not something that features largely in your psyche.
No.
Okay. Does that also come from having a parish priest father and a trainee nun as a mother?
Maybe there's something in that. But on the point of innovation, I think that's also links into the endeavor, which for many years I was kind of a mentor in, and with Visa now overseeing the work that we're doing with digital partnerships. We just launched an Africa accelerator. We've got literally thousands of startups from across Africa with such incredible creativity and just ideas and innovation doesn't come centrally. It's the plugging into the kind of the decentral bubbling of innovation is super exciting.
Did innovation come to you as a role, or were you looking for a role in innovation because of also how your curiosity?
I think it's probably a bit of both, but that was a really important part of moving the switch into Visa. It's quite a remarkable organisation, both in terms of its size, its performance over the years, the scope of geographical coverage, and kind of its leadership in payments. But that's an industry which is changing so much. And staying on top of that and being close to that innovation was something I found incredibly attractive, and I still come to work thinking, geez, lucky to be doing this stuff.
So for those listening to us who are thinking, okay, I wasn't around when Bitcoin was $100 or $4 or whatever it was, or that poor guy that bought that pizza with the Bitcoin that would be worth billions now. You're in a privileged place in the sense that, as you said, you cover a lot of areas. You look and innovation in financial services, oddly enough, probably comes from markets that are less developed or less from an infrastructure or regulatory perspective, because that's where there's freedom or a need, first of all, and then a freedom to experiment.
Yeah.
So you're seeing this, but then you're looking at it and saying, okay, how can I transfer this to a global audience and so on?
Yeah.
So give us a bit of a heads up. Where is financial services going in terms of innovation? And should we be worried about our dollars? And should we be worried about our banks? Or are we still fine in our lifetime?
I think we're very fine. Yeah. I think some of the things that, from an innovation perspective, which I think we're probably going to be seeing more of, is what we see a lot is the experiences. The digitization of payments is getting more and more seamless, and I think we'll see that continuing. But behind the infrastructure of payments, I think regulated digital assets are going to be something that is going to be more and more relevant. We're very actively participating in something in the UK called the Regulated Liability Network. There's another one in the US called Regulated Settlement Network, where it's taking some of the principles of blockchain, but in a fully regulated environment. And you're beginning to see more and more of that. The UAE is a big champion of that with the laws around stable coins, etc. So I think you're going to see a lot of innovation coming from regulated entities in that space, and that's something that we're clearly very involved with from a Visa perspective. I think the other thing that we're going to see more and more of is fraud and cybersecurity attacks and bad actors, because across the Visa network, you would not believe the number of times we are attacked on a daily basis, whether it's from cyber attacks or whether it's from attempts for fraud across the network. And so when everyone talks about AI, the application of that in preventing fraud within the payments infrastructure is a massive area of investment for us. And I think as these networks evolve, the 50-odd years of experience that we've had in that, honing that, is going to be increasingly relevant as the bad actors become smarter and more creative. I think the other area, which we haven't seen that much of yet, but we probably will in the next kind of 3-4 years, is the combining of generative AI and robotics. And we're looking at the Visa 2030 strategy, and as you think about what's the world going to be like in 2030, I think those are two industries. Robotics has been relatively quiet, but it's moving at pace, and as you see those two being combined, that's like a whole world which is going to burst onto industry and commerce and our day-to-day experiences.
So is my humanoid robot assistant, who's now driven by Gen AI, going to be a Visa customer paying all my bills while I go do something more interesting?
So one of the startups that we have just invested in, Payman AI, is looking at how payments can be conducted by your digital personal agent. So some of these things are companies are out there are beginning to think about this.
As a parent, I shudder at the bills that will be coming my way from my kids' use of automated agents. Interesting times.
We got a Visa solution for that as well.
Of course. Interesting times. Godfrey, to close a bit on a more personal note, often when I talk to people like yourselves, alumni who've already gone on this journey, when they look back, there's a lot of it's a very different thing when they look back at their journey versus when they were just starting it. Would you have predicted this journey for yourself when you were studying philosophy or when you were thinking about what to study?
Back as a child, growing up in Oxford, I didn't travel outside of... I went on a cycling trip with my dad when I was 12, but apart from that, I didn't travel anywhere till I was like 18. So the idea of moving over to the Middle East or somewhere like that was completely off the radar. And yeah, it's just a world away from those kind of like relatively humble origins. But I do remember in the early days in Dubai, it's probably when I was kind of thinking about consulting, traveling to Saudi and thinking, what else could I do? One of these guys said, look, there's this kind of like life coach guy. And so I met with him. He pulled up in this fancy Porsche. Interesting chat. And we were talking, and he said, envisage the future, Godfrey. I must have been like, 26 or something. And so I remember this kind of envisaging this future, Godfrey. And I kind of imagined this kind of beautiful greenhouse by the water, in kind of like luscious tropical surroundings. And I said, yeah, that's where I'd like to be as a future Godfrey. And I kind of think about that, and it's not too different from my house today. So in that respect, I think there is a lot of merit in being focused on what is important to you and what you want to do. And as life bumps you in different directions and you move from place to place, it's good to always sit down at the end of the year and say, all right, what's important to me? what do I want to be doing, and then you kind of course correct and eventually get there. For the last 10 years I've been writing I want to buy a place for retirement in the southwest of France, and year after year I just don't do it. And I think my wife says, Godfrey, forget this thing, you're never going to do it. But eventually in the summer we got a place, and I think there's a huge value in that kind of like that focus to the future. What that has in store, I'm
lifetime at Visa, apparently.
Well,
So you mentioned sort of the house. So that was something deliberate. But I like this point that you made in terms of keeping what's important to you top of mind. Can you think of a couple of other instances in your journey where reminding yourself of what's important actually led you to take a different change course correct, as you said, or make a specific decision?
I remember moral choices at work where there's different directions that one could choose, and always being super clear that the right choice, the kind of like morally right choice, is the one that you need to take. And there might be kind of negative consequences to that, but everyone comes across these challenges in their kind of personal life or professional life, and I think that's kind of like a good guiding point to make sure that if there's lots of different choices, like what is the best thing to do, not only for me but like morally, what is the best thing to do. And I think that plays out in how senior people should talk about things in the world. If you ask me about the future, I would like to have far more influence on some of the important matters that I do. I think within Visa it's a wonderful platform and an incredible opportunity to kind of influence positively the world around us. But there's other ways to do that as well. I think many of the directions of our leadership in countries is a little bit off course, and influencing that is something important.
In 10 years' time, it's Godfrey running for office.
There's different ways you can influence things, but I certainly have strong views on whether it's how countries interact with other countries, or issues such as inequality and these. So something certainly to consider in later years.
What I always like about these conversations, Godfrey, is that no matter how successful somebody has become, and you, like most of the alumni, have really had amazing careers, there's always an ambition to do more, to be more, to learn more, to give back. And I see that quite clearly in your mindset as well. It's been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karim. Thank you.
Pleasure having you.